Good morning. So, I'd like to talk to you today about Galavasana, the history behind the pose, and how to perform it. Now, Galavasana, or what is known as Flying Pigeon, is one of the more sort of intermediate arm balances, and you need to have some level of proficiency with crow, with flying crow, and a couple of other such arm balance poses where you need to take the leg out. Now, the flying pigeon name, of course, doesn't do sort of justice to the Sanskrit name, which is Galavasana. Now, Galav is basically means Gala means the neck in Sanskrit and in Hindi. And Galava was a sage, right? And Galavasana is dedicated to this sage. Now, Galavasana is dedicated to sage Galava because as a child he was sage Vishwamitra's son, and when Vishwamitra was away in the forest doing penance, his wife fell on hard times and she couldn't afford to feed the child, so she took him to the market to be sold. And a bit of a morbid story, and she had to tie him to the post. So she took him to the market to be sold as a slave, and she put a cord around his neck, and that cord or that rope was tied to a post. So in Galavasana, as you go up, you sort of the entire spine all the way up to the heel of the leg resembles that cord which was tied to the neck, and that's why this pose is called Galavasana. It resembles the cord that was tied to Galava's. His name wasn't initially Galava, but it came to be Galava after this incident, and so this sort of pose resembles him being tied to the post, and he was squatting down, and the rest of the pose mimics his squatting position. Now, Vishwamitra also has his own pose dedicated to him, and his main rival was Vashishta. So if you look at Vashishta Asana, it seems like a very graceful, effortless pose when done by a proficient practitioner. Whereas Vishwamitra, who was his rival, sage Vashishta's rival, the pose dedicated to him shows a lot of effort and angst. Both are powerful one-arm balance poses and equally difficult, but one looks very graceful, the other looks full of effort and angst. And that's because Vishwamitra was actually a king who got jealous of Vashishta's spiritual prowess, and therefore decided to rival him and become a bigger sage than him. Coming back to Galava Asana, so when Galava was taken to the market to be sold, he was saved by Satyavrata. Now, Satyavrata was another prince who was who was not in favor of Vashishta, because he thought that his father gave undue attention to Vashishta. So he saved Vishwamitra's son because he wanted to spite Vashishta and make sure that Vishwamitra's son was safe. So he took care of him until Vishwamitra came back. And when Vishwamitra came back, their sort of friendship and their respect for each other grew. And at one stage, Satyavrata, who was also known as Trishanku because he had 3 curses on him, so Trishanku means 3 curses, wanted to ascend to heaven, and he wanted to ascend to heaven in his mortal body. So Vishwamitra, being obliged to him, decided to help him with his spiritual powers. And as he rose Satyavrata up to the heavens, Indra debarred him from entering heaven. So a power struggle ensued, and eventually the reconciliation was that a parallel heaven was created for Satyavrata, which is called Trishanku heaven, and Trishanku stayed there. And this actually is known as the Southern Cross, or the Crux constellation in Western astronomy. And if you look at Western Cross or Southern Cross, you will see it looks like somebody hung on a cross, and that is how Satyavrata looked when he was stuck in the middle of hell and heaven, while the Devas and Vishwamitra were deciding on his fate. So that's about the mythology, the history behind the pose. Now let's get into doing the pose. So you need to obviously have some level of hip openers done before this. You need to have some shoulder openers and shoulder mobility warm-ups done, and only then approach this pose, right? But I'll show you just how the pose is done for today. So to approach the pose, we need to, let me drag this so that the camera is clearer. You need to come into a figure of four or a standing pigeon pose, right? So once you come into the standing pigeon pose and you've stabilized yourself, you make sure that you've stabilized yourself, and then you raise your arms up. And once you're ready, you start pushing the hips back and bringing the chest close to the leg. And as you've got the chest close to the legs, you place the hands down. You make sure that you hook your left elbow, left tricep, because I'm doing it with the right leg. So the left tricep needs to be hooked with the right foot. Start putting your weight down, bringing your head clear of the two hands, and then once you're ready, you take your foot off, right? Now once you take your foot off, you need to start taking it up depending on your ability to take that up. So this is Galavasana. Now as a bonus, you can come into Padangusthasana and go into Grasshopper also. So in Grasshopper, you bring your right tricep now on the right foot. Make sure that you have turned around fully. Take the weight and then come up and go into Grasshopper. So those are the two arm balances for today. Hope you enjoyed the story around Galavasana, and I'll see you again soon enough.